welcome to today's session. So, in celebration of International Women's Day this past weekend, thank you so much for being here and for joining this conversation on how we collectively together can leverage our stories, our personal stories, for greater purpose and impact. So, working in communications, it's safe to say, I'm sure we are all pretty proficient and great at telling the stories of our organizations and our clients, and probably a little or a lot less practice at telling our own. So today we're going to really talk about and make this a very informal discussion about ways to craft personal narratives that really inspire action. So to introduce myself, I'm Dana Snyder. I'm a very proud executive board member here at ICI, Impact Communications Institute. I am a speaker. I am an author of the Monthly Giving Mastermind. I work with nonprofits on building monthly giving programs. That's my jam. And I host the podcast Missions to Movements. And I will be moderating our session today. So please, again, as you're just joining, welcome to this conversation. Please share your name, where you're joining from, and if there's anything fun about spring that you love. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge the two other lovely women on the screen. Would you please do a quick introduction of yourselves? And then I will continue into the drum beat of the intro. So, Charlotte, I'll pass it to you first.
Sounds good. And I'm going to hold back my why for later. But I am Charlotte, Managing Director of Environmental Impact at Yulu, an impact communications firm, and delighted to be joining everyone today. I'll hand over to Sabrina.
Hi guys, my name's Sabrina. I'm head of strategy and co-founder as well of Nuance Matter, which is a new IPG offering that focuses on cultural intelligence. Don't let the accent sway you. I'm in New York, but I put on the accent as my colleagues here know because I'm from Grenada in the islands and people don't understand me when I speak in my native language here. So that's why you get the full code switching experience today.
It's so nice to have both of you here. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work in Atlanta, Georgia, the traditional homeland of the Muskogee Creek people who lived, worked, and produced and knowledge on and nurtured the land where Atlanta is now located. Atlanta is also the historic center for the civil rights movement where our leaders fought for justice and equality. So, a couple of housekeeping items. If you can, please keep yourselves on mute throughout the session. We ask to respect the opinions of others. We invite participation, a lot of participation, specifically in this session. We do have some planned time for Q&A, but there's going to be lots of moments where we invite comments and questions into the chat because this is about you workshopping your personal stories. So we have some prompts for that purpose to have this be more actionable, not just us talking at you the whole time. This session is being recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube channel afterwards. So a little bit about ICI, if this is the first time joining, anything about what we do. If you're joining us first, this Institute is really focused on leading the drive to use tools of communication for positive systemic change. If you want to learn more, if somebody on the team can drop a link, visit impactcommsinstitute.org to learn more. And we have an amazing pledge on there that you can sign to say that you are going to lead with responsible and ethical communication. So today, a little bit different. I'm going to kick us off with a short presentation. It's kind of like a mini version of a keynote I normally give. And then I'm going to bring our guests back on screen with us to really take these things I'm talking about and put them into practical use form with all of us. And so this is really meant to help us all own our individual expertise and experiences and stories, and how can we create these narratives that really inspire action. So I said this was going to be a very comment-driven presentation. And I wasn't kidding. So right from the start, can everyone see my screen okay? Thumbs up and emojis. Okay, great. Let me get my chat back down. I would like for you to answer this question in the chat. Share with everyone. Take a second. What's a highlight moment from your career? It could be a big story behind the moment. It could be a micro story. It could be something that just happened. It could have happened 5 years ago, 5 minutes ago. What's a highlight moment from your career? And you can also write this down privately, but if you feel like sharing it in the chat, you can drop it down. Oh, yay, Garrett, starting my new position at Yulu. transitioning from for-profit to working for charities. I love it. Oh, feeling good about going parental leave, knowing the company was in good hands. That's a huge one. Beautiful. So let these continue to flood in because today, what we're going to focus on, there's a lot of sessions that focus on your organization. This one's focused on you and the fact that your story is so unbelievably worthy and important to share. And our stories, our personal ones, that connect us to the missions and the work that we do are so much usually untold. So you, I am sure, have many, many, many stories. And today we are going to be talking about how to share, how to uncover, how to discover which of those stories to share, where to share them, to not only amplify your organization and the work that you do, but really your personal brand and thought leadership. So why does this matter for me? So years ago, back in Redbox days, I watched this movie called The Whistleblower. It was 2011. So if you can think about maybe where you were back in 2011. And I had graduated from college just like the past semester. And again, it was a random Redbox find. We wanted to watch something like a thriller. Now, come to find out, this movie was a true story. So at the end of the movie, you know, sometimes they say like based on a true story, but I did not know until the very end. This was about human trafficking and a true story of a police officer who ended up going over to Bosnia, was working with the UN, and uncovered a human trafficking ring. At that point, I did not know anything about human trafficking, that it even existed, what it was. And I was shocked. And so I immediately wanted to do something about it. So, of course, I went to Google how to find support anti-human trafficking efforts. And I realized there's over 1,000 nonprofits in the US alone focused on anti-human trafficking efforts. And so how was I going to figure out and distinguish which organization I wanted to volunteer or support or find out more about? And there's the concept of a moat. So a moat, you might have heard this in business terms, where it's really the company's competitive advantage, like how it protects itself from competitors, secures profitability, and it's derived from this, like a very medieval moat surrounding a castle, and it's a barrier to potential invaders back in the day. In current day, the number one way to create moats is a strong brand recognition and loyalty and people and the individuals telling stories about said brands or causes. So I came across Blythe Hill. Blythe Hill is the founder and CEO of Dressember, an anti-human trafficking organization in Los Angeles. I moved to Los Angeles, ended up getting to meet Blythe, but at the time I had found this TEDx talk of hers and immediately gravitated towards the work that she was doing with Dressember. It's this really creative peer-to-peer campaign where you wear dresses and or ties for a whole month in December to raise funds and awareness for anti-human trafficking efforts. Blythe and I became friends. I interviewed her on my podcast. She was actually my third episode that ever came out. And then I recently interviewed her years later, as she's just recently gone through a merger and acquisition with International Justice Mission, IJM, another really wonderful organization on an international scale. And so her unique story, her speaking, and whether it's on podcasts, whether it's through blogs, really excited and compelled me to support their journey. So fast forward to today, I have been a monthly donor of Dressember's program, The Collective, for 5 years, and I have no plan to stop and love what they're doing. So a little bit about me. I tell stories on LinkedIn. I'm very excited to share things about with Charlotte. And she has like an audit we're going to go through and make this really practical for everyone. But at core of who I am is a mom. This is my daughter, Kennedy. She's now almost 2, but we have been telling stories in this house on repeat over and over and over again. If there's any parents, you read the same book a lot. Little Blue Truck. And so these stories are all about our lives and our relationships and our connections. Because, I think.
Dana, you've gone on mute.
I think, Dana, you went on mute while maybe the host tried to mute everybody. They might have muted you too.
Oh, okay. How
You're
about now?
you're back. We hear you now.
Okay. That's a really impactful moment. So with whether it's fundraising, whether it's you're working on a partnership, it's all about relationships and connections. And so the best way that we always do that is through storytelling. So personal branding and thought leadership is a really important way for us to do this in our professions. And a couple of quick stats, I will not belabor these. 82% of consumers say they are more likely to trust a company when its senior executives are active on social media. 77% of consumers say they are more likely to buy from a brand when the CEO or a public figure is visible and active. So then when I've been in rooms, and I've been in rooms with hundreds and hundreds of people, and I ask, like, when's the last time you've shared your unique story? And it's crickets sometimes. So why don't we focus on it more? If there's this like natural importance, it's how we day to day communicate with each other and we love stories. What shies us away from working on it? And you'll be like, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is sometimes these thoughts come into our heads like, no one wants to hear from me. Why would they want to hear from me? Someone's going to think I'm gloating, that I'm just talking about a win that I have. Oh, somebody else has absolutely talked about that better than I have. Like, I'm going to let them cover it. What's unique about my perspective? Why does it matter? These are all things centered around imposter syndrome. But the more you know, the more confident you can be. And sometimes it's literally just about sharing the educational, and the messy middle is what we love to hear from others. So there's the imposter syndrome that kind of plays on one side of us. And then there's this time versus results ratio. So I love this concept because we live in the Amazon world where time flies when Prime delivers and it's instant gratification. But a lot of times when we're posting and we're sharing stories, like especially today on LinkedIn, we're going to be talking about, or Instagram, if that's your thing, or Threads, whatever it is, and you're sharing something and you hear crickets, it makes us say, well, no one's listening. Why would I ever want to continue sharing? But the thing is, we just have to have that steady drumbeat and cadence, and things will grow. So the magic of storytelling is this. When we hear a story, we see ourselves in someone's story naturally. You start thinking about things that have happened in your own life experience, and our bodies literally produce like a chemical reaction to this. And we form a connection that we don't even know is happening with the person that we're listening to. Maybe anything that I have said, maybe you're like, oh yeah, like that resonates with me with what she's saying. We crave the messy middle, the how, just to be seen by others. So if you're thinking about today and where we're going to kind of jump off is here. Where do I start? You have so many great stories and they can connect to the work you do, even if they might seem at the time that they have nothing to do with it. There's always ways to eve and flow things together. So I wanted to share a couple of content buckets for you to think about and brainstorm. If you've been having like the blank cursor screen of I have no idea what to share, is teaching through life experiences is a big one. There are so many things that you have gone through that would be incredibly impactful to share. Another one, celebration. Sabrina has a big celebration moment that I'm excited to bring up in just a second, but also challenging moments. What have been challenging moments and how you've gotten through those? How you overcame the odds, career accomplishments. What are wins that you can celebrate? So what I would like us to do is to take a second to put these things into practice. So get ready to head in the chat, and I have a prompt for you. Actually, I have 3 prompts. So quick fire thinking here. Number 1, what are 3 things that you're an expert at? In the chat. What are 3 things? And they do not have to be all professional. You could be a great baker. You could be really good at playing cards. You could be really great at booking trips and planning a trip. You could also be a really good writer or pitcher or speaker or mom or whatever. Just think about it. And again, you can write these in a private journal or you can write these in the chat. Second prompt to think about. What is an OMG, this is so cool moment? my gosh, I love these: knitter, public speaker, planner, climate parent, listening, love gift giving, hosting dinners. Oh, yes, Jesse, that's a great one. Okay, I would want to read a whole post on how you host a great dinner. Like, I would be very jazzed to hear all about that. Second, it's an OMG, this is so cool moment. Like, I want to shout it from the rooftops. I can't believe this just happened. One of mine was, while we're thinking about this prompt, I was able to attend Big Sean's album release party in Los Angeles, and it was like 40 people, and Beyonce and Jay-Z and Ariana Grande were there, and that was like an OMG, this is so cool. And I actually got the guts to say, hi, how are you, to Beyonce, and she responded, and I was like, mind blown. So that, I actually shared a LinkedIn post and how that led to me being more courageous and asking for partnerships. And sometimes somebody might even not respond to you, but at least you can try and you can ask and be bold. So an OMG, so cool moment. Lastly, a story from the work you do that's made a profound impact on you. And again, you can screenshot these, you can write these down to kind of noodle on later. And today, what we're going to focus on is when you have these stories, and you have many, 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 I'm sure, hopefully just these 3 prompts give you some ideas. You're like, great, I have all of them. Where in the world should I share them? In a professional stance, LinkedIn, podcast, stages, dinners and events. Maybe you want to write a book. Oh my goodness, Sabrina, what? You were interviewing Ronald? Wow, that's insane. And amazing. Today, we're going to focus on LinkedIn. I think it's a great place to start. It's known as a platform. We're going to talk about multi-platforms as well, but it's a great platform for business leaders, decision makers. And there's this concept that actually Ariana Unai, she's the head of LinkedIn for nonprofits, shared in a recent presentation she did, was Metcalfe's Law. And talking about the more people or devices that are connected to a network, the more valuable that network becomes. And I think this is so prevalent when it comes to LinkedIn. Like, your colleagues are there. In my world, donors are there, sponsors are there, potential podcast guests are there, new friends are there. So really thinking about what content works well here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition over to my 2 co-host guests today and put some of this into practice. Charlotte, I would love to kind of like head over to you and ask a little bit about putting this in practice as to what's your why and your personal brand and story, and how has that really helped you amplify the work that you do?
Hello, thank you for the mic. So let me start with my why. So you heard in my introduction, I'm managing director of environmental impact. But in terms of my why, I had a pivotal moment in my career about 7 years ago. I've worked in comms for about 20 years. And this is where personal and career collide, because I had become a mum. I've got 2 awesome kids, Finley and Oscar, aged 8 and 10. And going back into the workplace after maternity leave wasn't easy. And so I had this realization, if I'm not going to spend time being with my kids, I want to dedicate my time to doing something that's going to create a sustainable planet for them. So it was at that time that I shifted to climate communications with intention. So I joined Yulu, an impact communications agency. But I will say at the time I had this passion and wish to be a climate communications expert, but I didn't necessarily have the lived experience to be a climate communications expert. So leading with my why certainly helped me get along my journey, and helped build connections. And I don't think I realized at the time that that was the start of becoming an entrepreneur and innovating within an organization. I was just kind of following my values and wanting to make a difference. So that was the kind of start of my journey. And now 7 years on, we've represented 30 different climate organizations. We have an established environmental practice. So it's been this amazing flywheel effect that's built upon itself, but it started with passion, wish, and a dedication, and then a heck of a lot of learning to get it going.
I love that. It's so good. That reminds me, when I used to work in the agency space, which now feels like eons ago, at DKC, and helped launch DKC Cares, which was
Hmm.
our like give back component, and that didn't exist. And obviously, it makes sense now looking forward 8 years of why I decided to work in the nonprofit space. And all I wanted to
Yeah.
do was work with like pro bono clients. That's beautiful. And I want to loop in Sabrina into this too. Sabrina, you had said something really powerful during our preparation call about what's your personal brand now versus what you want it to be. Can you share, like, what do you mean by that? And then how have you really navigated your own personal brand journey?
And what I'm intrigued by, in my day-to-day, I run an agency and an offering, but also on the side note, I also teach as well. So a professor in different avenues. And what I always say to my students is, I'm here to engage your critical thinking. I'm not here
Mm,
to share information to you that you repeat back to me. I'm not in the It's not my thing to teach parrots or to create parrots. I want you to engage your own thought process. And so the reason why I say that, it's relation to one of the syllabi that I addressed was personal branding to the students. And I saw that it was very hard for them to decide what they wanted to be.
mm,
I'm waiting to hear improvisate, well, from being inspired by other people. They were talking in the class, say, well, can we hear others? And what I shared with them at the time is, what you're doing then is creating a copy and paste of someone else's idea, and then you go Googling another word to make sure that it
mm.
sits in the same family. So that's the hard work. You have to decide what you want your brand to be now, not what you want it to be, because then that's how you're able to measure and develop the change that you want to see
That's
too.
right.
So you have a starting ground, and it's only for you. This is not it's not a race or anything like that. It's not something that you need to put in on your LinkedIn and have everybody weigh in. It's starting from an honest place, and then giving yourself the permission to grow as you build up the skills to lean into what you want that brand to be too.
Totally. I love that progress over perfection. Man, where were you when I was in college? I wish you were my professor. I feel like I was a parrot a lot of times on some exams. I think that's so profound. And I think, can you share a little bit, how has that evolved maybe in your own, like as for you and your personal brand? Like, how has that really evolved?
Yeah, well, I would say that my ethos, my internal ethos is best in respect, dot, dot, dot. And I changed the word and the adjective at the end of that. So I have, in my mind, I want to do best in respect marketing. That's what I do in my day to day. Of course, I'm here to achieve some bottom line growth for clients, but I do not want that to be at the sacrifice of those that they are in service to, the
Mm,
consumer. I don't want it to feel condescending. I don't want it to feel capitalism over the consciousness of others. Where can I meet that equilibrium? Then I also have best in respect traveling. So when I travel, I make sure I traveling for me, and it's what I'm taking this from my friend because it's how she described it, is that traveling and photography for me is my meditation.
mm,
And I'm not in it to do the tick. I've got some content that I put on my IG channel. I'm there to make a connection, and I'm there to have a human experience with
right.
people who are living in the communities, that are living as part of the culture, to be a positive witness to it. And the way I travel, am I doing it with respect? And am I going there? I'm not there to be a judge. I'm there to be a witness. So those are our different aspects. And even again, I'll tie it back to my teaching. Am I doing best in respect of equipping my students to going into a working environment? Again, what I feel benefits from an academia point of view is when you have people in the field who are teaching you, and it's not just the book. I tell you how to, or I direct you how it's done in the field. So they have a little bit more, as actually you were saying earlier, Dana, which is the confidence. I might not understand everything that's going on around me, but my professor's given me a little bit info that I understand, or I get the gist. This makes this experience less nerve-wracking for me. So that's how I put my personal brand. What do I want to achieve, and then what shape or form will that come in?
Beautiful. And I want to just kind of like double tap on something that you talked about with photography. Do you mind if I share with
Yeah.
everyone an image right now, and then you can tell us about it because I think it like plays so well into this conversation. Okay, let me share my screen again, and then we're gonna have way more questions and examples to share with everyone. But this is gorgeous. Okay, Sabrina, what are we looking at?
You are looking at a picture. This is when I was in the Baja Highlands. I was in traveling through Papua New Guinea. I am at my best, like a puppy on its back being tickled when I've got a backpack and I am just me and my navigating through different countries. I don't say off the beaten path. It's those that don't get the attention or the spotlight. And this is when I was staying in one of the villages and it's a local festival. It's not done for tourists. It's the tribes come down from the hills and the mountains. They gather together and they all celebrate one another's tribal backgrounds. And this beautiful little boy was very inquisitive and was staring at me. And it's not as intense as it looks, I promise you. It's more the curiosity as she looks like me, but she's not me, and I can't quite figure it out. So we became friends. And this picture, as you can see, was featured in Vogue this week, and I'm very happy about that.
Amazing. Well done.
Amazing, huge snaps. Congratulations. And that's a huge part of your brand. Charlotte, I have pulled up here. People can probably see lots of LinkedIn tabs.
Yep.
Um, can we dive into LinkedIn for a second?
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
tell us specifically about, and I'm going to pull up your beautiful profile, leveraging thought leadership on LinkedIn specifically, like
Mhm.
do you think some key strategies for using LinkedIn to build a purpose-driven brand?
Yeah, great questions. I guess the first thing to think about again, center your why. What is it you are doing, and what change do you want to see in the world? And then how can you show up in all aspects of your professional life? So LinkedIn is one platform, but in my view, you need to show up in every instance with that brand persona and values. So if we take LinkedIn in particular, so practical things to consider. Your title, how are you going to show up on your title? We all have official job titles, but what else can you do or add that's going to stand out and resonate with your why? In my world, in climate circles, born in 342 parts per million is climate speak for what time I was born. Climate people would understand. Journalists might not have a clue, but it's a conversation starter
Love
with
it.
those I'm looking to connect with. I think one of my biggest pieces of feedback as well is if you scroll down, the introductory section about the about section, I think too commonly it's treated almost like a resume, like here's my
Mm,
professional skills, and it can be cold and robotic and corporate and kind of self-congratulatory often. I think if you center your why and your purpose and you invite in collaboration, it's a nicer way of engaging and it pulls people in. I meet with people often as a result of LinkedIn. I'd say I go for coffees 10-ish times a month as a result of LinkedIn. I reach out to
wow.
people, people reach out to me. It's great, but I think that's because I intentionally, if you see my language, I'm very welcoming. And so I guess another consideration is what is the personal brand values that you hold and that you're going to
Mm,
show up with across all of your channels. And just to
right.
kind of reflect on my values, they would be collaboration and again, intentional for climate communications. We're not going to get out of our climate mess without collaboration. So welcoming people in is part of that. Being curious, it's a very fast evolving space. You have to kind of constantly be open to learning. So coming at it with curiosity and learning new solutions and new challenges is really important. And then for me as well, I also I'm comfortable with being a little bit playful, and that's because it's quite a dark subject matter, and you can get lost in climate anxiety unless you are willing to take a breath. It's okay, and bring a bit of light to the conversation. So I think being playful is good for me too. So yeah, play on the about section. And then the other thing, I've got a few content strategies, but the other thing I'll highlight before that is at the very bottom of profiles, you've got extra things that you can use just to show up as a thought leader. So there's you can show everywhere you've been published, if you're great creating a blog, put it on there, show your volunteering, because again, all of those things are building credibility. They're building your thought leadership platform and explaining why you're an expert. Um,
Amazing.
so if perhaps from here, I'll just go into a couple of different content strategies to consider to build up your thought leadership platform. So if you don't mind flicking to the next LinkedIn example that you've got on your screen, thank you. So when considering your personal brand, one of the kind of core recommendations would be to generate thought leadership content. And again, this comes back to that imposter syndrome of what do I want to be speaking about and why. So if you center your why and find out and identify your areas of strengths, that would hopefully give steer of what your topic of choice could be. For me, it's this Venn diagram of communications and climate, and I play in the middle. That's where I feel most comfortable. I didn't start there. I dedicated a lot of time to learning to find that specialism. So if you feel like an imposter, spend time learning. And then from there, you can generate thought leadership content in that space and provide something unique to the world. So in this scenario, having spent several years now in this space, I've kind of considered how on earth do we solve climate change? What's the role of communications, and develop this map of all the different things we need to activate and the role of communications within it. So it's just one example that is very applicable to me, but it could be cross-purposed for others as suits their needs. And I would say
this is a newsletter. So like a LinkedIn article, essentially.
It's an article, yes. Yeah.
So this is a great way of having a longer form piece of content on LinkedIn that's also SEO searchable, especially if you are, like Charlotte, a subject matter like expert or even learning on a specific topic, to be able to go in more in depth. And within LinkedIn, you can build an audience that every time, like, people can subscribe essentially to your newsletters and get notified every time you release a new one, along with a post that can go out with this as well. So it's kind of like a blog within LinkedIn is how I think about it.
Yeah.
Is there a specific cadence on how often you publish your LinkedIn articles?
I think if you do it at least once a month, that would be a great cadence. We're all busy. More regular would be great, but once a month is a solid number. But just find something that's unique would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Next one.
Yeah, next one. So this is another example from me, and then I've got some other examples. So my second consideration is write something that's a bit unexpected and thought-provoking. So don't mimic what other people are doing. Find something that is unique that you feel confidence in speaking out about. So this is an example again of being a little bit playful. I was reflecting on the fact that if we want people to cut carbon emissions, people don't even know what they are. You can't see them. How are we going to have any sense of how much we're putting out into the world and how we change it? So I was reflecting on the fact if we thought about it like money, we might behave a bit differently. If you had a limited spend, would you behave differently? So I was having a bit of fun with it about different spending habits that we each have and how that relates to our carbon emissions. And it was just an odd thought one day, and it did well, and it got cross-shared by other people in other climate groups. So it just sparked thought about a different way of coming out at this global problem. So again, I think the reason it did well is it was unique, thought-provoking, and it wasn't mimicking. It was something that was generating an idea.
So good. Love it.
Cool. So my next example is from co-founder of Intersectional Environmentalist. So this is a good example of really centering your community. So if you're building your profile in a certain space, who is your community and what can you put out into the world that is actually going to benefit them? So you're centering them and not you. So why I love this post is they pulled together news resources of trusted climate journalism at a time when there was a lot of conversation and a lot of change with the availability of climate reporters. And it did extraordinarily well because it was a resource that people wanted and needed at that moment in time. That's a reasonably easy thing for people to do, but it's a very helpful resource to put out into the world. So again, I think that came from centering what the community wanted versus what they wanted to say. So that's another way about thinking about your content strategy.
Love that. Interestingly, on a similar note, and I can maybe show this in a second, I years ago had pulled together. So in speaking, women are predominantly way less booked for speaking engagements. I think it's like 32% of women are speakers, and especially on the paid, significantly underpaid for speaking versus men. And so I pulled together, I think in 2018, a blog post of 16 nonprofit women speakers. And on International Women's Day, I updated it and refreshed it because so many of our businesses have changed. What we focus on has changed, and sent a note to that list of women that I had been on there and be like, please let me know what's new about your bio, your organization, any new accolades, like things that I can put on here, recommendations. And I'll pull it up after we share these, but then I shared it on LinkedIn and I was like, who am I missing? I know I'm
Yes,
missing so many. And it just flooded with comments.
it's a great idea.
And I actually just I had a phone call this morning um, with someone who wants to possibly book me for a speaking engagement later this year. And I said, are you looking for any other speakers? She's like, yes, actually. And I was like, great. I have a list full of women that you should hire. And I like sent her the list. She's
Amazing.
like, this is amazing. I
Yeah.
was having to like randomly search and see what would work. And I was like, I can vouch for all of these people on all different topic areas. And so that was just like another example of kind of like a resource-based thing that you can
Yes,
share.
I love that. I can see why your community benefited from it, and I think that's the key to getting it
Right.
right. Cool. So moving on to fourth example. So this is about being timely, and this is by the founder of SPUN, the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks. I work with Toby. I love Toby. She is so captivating to me. She is um, mapping the underground networks worldwide, the fungal networks we can't see under our feet. Ridiculously cool.
Wow.
But I love the fact this again for me is why a founder story is sometimes more powerful than the brand itself, because a brand is an entity and it's not a person, and you connect with people. So the founder's story can often be more powerful. And Toby puts out great content. It's often visual and video. But for this, I think the takeaway is being timely. So tying into what is happening. This post was happening around COP, and it had a specific call to action around COP. So in the same way that a newsroom that many of us communicators will pitch, they're thinking about what people want to know now, or what are they talking about,
Mm.
Engage, put something out in that conversation, so it's timely and relevant, versus being that evergreen content is a consideration.
So cool. And video right now is extremely, it's not a word, extremely popular on
Is
LinkedIn. If you've noticed, especially on mobile, they've made it like a forefront whole new section if you're scrolling down your feed. So they do not have to be professional by any means, like holding phone, saying something, teaching something powerful. The Instagram green screen effect works really well. I had a video take off with like 1 million impressions earlier this year talking about 5 nonprofit predictions I had for the year. And I shared it on LinkedIn. Like semi blew my mind, but does not have to be complicated by any means. So cool.
I love
Okay.
that. I love it when content
Last,
surprises you and it does well when you weren't
yeah,
expecting it. You're like, oh,
yeah,
you never know. I do feel like with this, it very much is trial and error, and I think that that's something to consider as well. That you may not get it right first time, and that is okay. It's a learning
totally.
experience and evolution over time. So my final example is from another founder. And this one is about being personal, a bit raw and a bit real, and it ties to International Women's Day. So this founder used this moment in time to share some of her experiences, not always positive as a female founder, and some of the things that she had to overcome, and then some calls to action about the things that we need to address. So it was timely because it was International Women's Day. It was raw and honest, and it resonated. And you can see from the reactions,
Yeah.
it hit the mark at the right moment with other women in the workplace and women founders who felt a sense of connection with her experiences. So again, I think being a little bit raw and personal can probably more importantly, advance the conversation online, as well as then enhancing your own personal brand. You're putting something out that's meaningful and people connect with.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all these. I have also been sharing the links to all of them in the chat as well. So
Thank
if
you.
anybody wants to go back and look at any of these more in depth, feel free to please do so. Thank you, Charlotte, so much for all of those wonderful examples. And I feel like we might all be running to our LinkedIn's to do a quick profile audit check. Sabrina, I know Threads is a platform that you mentioned you were active over thinking of when we think about kind of the ecosystem of how we express ourselves and thinking about what aspects we want to share consistently across all of our channels. How do you, maybe this is something you talk about with your students or even practice yourself. How are you showing up and expressing that on the multiple channels that maybe that you choose to show up on?
Yeah. So I usually start with, if I take my title away, who am I? And I feel
Mm,
that there's so much leans into the work, your value at work, and hinge to the title, that when somebody leaves it or for whatever circumstances that are out of your control, they feel at a loss because they were chasing the title. So what I do is that's what I start with. So outside of the work, this head of strategy, co-founder, whatever you want to call it, what do I want to represent? How do I want to feel when I share something, when another person's reading it? How do I want to feel when I know they're reading it in that context, if that makes sense?
yeah.
So and something that you were saying, Charlotte, too, is the trial and error. It's also post and do something because you like it and you want
Mhm.
it. Because if you're always chasing the
Right,
engagement
right.
consistently, it's not going to be something that's ever going to give you any joy, because the
So
highs
true.
are the highs and then it drops off. Like I'm sure we've been there in some context or another. So for instance, I'll start with LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, of course, I'll share industry and articles that I've written, etc. But what I've been doing in the past 3 weeks is on Friday, I was like, guys, there's a lot going on in this world. So here's 5 things that are nice to give you that little bit of an endorphin hit. Here's, if anybody's a fan of Bob Burgers, that's an anime which I absolutely love. And then everybody knows about Lady Gaga and her Abracadabra video. There was an animator from Bob's Burgers who did Lady Gaga. I thought it was incredible. But then there was also the movement that's going on in Rio de Janeiro, where they are turning any type of rooftop into a garden to actually make it self-sustaining as AC. So whether it's a bus stop, whether it's a home, whether it's something, it's a crate, they're planting things. That's nice. So
Yeah.
it's not showing my work side of, knowing what's going on around the world and also in the market, but also that little bit of joy, because if I'm feeling the burden of being in it, I'm other people too. So that's the humanity side I want to share in LinkedIn. In Threads, it's very much also, I want to make it as a conversation. I see Threads as my water cooler, but it could be a water cooler at the gym. It could be a water cooler at work. What do I like talking about? Who watched Abbott Elementary last night? Why did Gregory do her that way? Sorry, I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
it's also showing what your another side of your personality too, and also what you like doing. Like I've said, I like taking photos, so I'll share a couple of photography on it too. If I've watched X-Men, you're probably seeing there's a theme of what I like doing. But if I watch X-Men 97, my goodness, last night's episode killed me. So you get the people have different aspects of your personality, but there is a tone and an emotional warmth that comes from it
Yes.
too. And all of it
Yes.
is rooted in a bit of reassurance. LinkedIn is reassurance that you know what you're doing because of the role that you hold and info you're sharing, but also the emotional intelligence of somebody
Yeah.
who's in the role and at work and also understands the heavy weight. So we do need something a bit positive. And then again, on the threads, it's the water cooler moment. I'm also on Spill as well. If something happening in culture, or make a comment on it, showing that you're tapped in. But then also, again, it gives you a bit of brevity. So what I would encourage is sort of like a little writing on a post-it, just one of these channels, stick it on wherever you want. You do it on a Canva, I don't mind your medium, but just what do you want it to be? What do you want it to
Mm.
represent for you? And that ties back into, again, your personal branding.
So good. So good. I want to make sure if we have questions, please let them know in the chat. Um, for both of you, Sabrina, I'll start with you first. Do you have a set strategy of I post these days on LinkedIn, these days on Threads, or do you let it be a little bit more like go with the flow? You post as something strikes you for inspiration.
Yeah, so if it's something work related, my days are it's Monday and a Wednesday. Those are ones I get. And then on Tuesday afternoon, like two, that seems to have worked out better engagement for me. If it's something quite personal, Usually it's a Monday, like a Monday morning when everybody's getting up and wanting the positive hit, because we all do it like scrolling en route or whether at home. But I'll do Mondays, I will do Fridays as well. And I'm not really a poster over the weekend. Not unless I put a reel together and then I'll drop it on a Saturday afternoon. But that's very more like the personal stuff than it would be like work stuff. And that's more about my traveling.
Awesome. Thank you. Charlotte, how about yourself?
I do have calendar reminders just to make sure that I create the space to create that original content, and that's on a weekly cadence in the first half of the week. And then I'll say that time is precious, so I use the gaps in my day to jump on and engage with the community. So I often do it at 6 o'clock in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee. I am always scrolling and engaging, and then when I'm at the swimming pool watching my kids, I'm also then building my network. So I do it in like dead bits of time, but then I also have protected time to actually generate content and put it out. So it's a bit of a mix.
I might say I also work on some comments, like responding to comments while I am casually watching, like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette.
Yeah. Multitasking, it's a good skill.
Multitasking, or Queer Eye, or Love is Blind, any of the top shows, revealing myself. I have a question. This is the last question I have, and then I will leave it open. Is for both of you to answer this. Sometimes when, and I don't know, listeners, if you come across this, but if we work for a company where there might be an old or outdated, or maybe it is the current internal comm strategy that is not as friendly or open-minded about employees having thought leadership, which I think is pretty backwards in today's age and should applaud that. But sometimes that's not always the case. How can they really feel empowered within their company? How do they mediate that? Charlotte, do you want to take a stab first?
Yeah, it's a great question, and fortunately, I'm not one of the people who have this barrier whatsoever. But for those who do, I would say build a business case to undo those old school rules. When it comes to personal branding, it absolutely benefits the organization. And I think there's an education process that needs to happen to make an organization understand the value in somebody standing up and having a persona. Yeah, I build the business case, get the policies changed, and showcase the value of doing so. You may need to bring in examples to really prove your point. But I think you have to work to undo those old school systems.
Agreed. Awesome. Sabrina, how about yourself?
Yeah, actually, it's something that I wouldn't say I'm dealing with now, but navigating at the moment. So I'm currently writing an opinion essay for Media Channel, and but within the conglomerate world, not supposed to talk about politics, but this one is very much about the theme is about what is happening with sisterhood right now, because it's very exhausting, all these different opposing opinions, and it's kind of like the disintegration of female ideology, where we're supposed to be there for one another, but it seems that there is so much divisiveness that the oppression has now come wrapped in a feminine form, because it can be from the person who's supposed to be an ally, and that's not even taken into consideration intersectionality too. Now, I can't write that for IPG, as in going in there and saying that, but what I am writing it is for myself, and I'm submitting it not just within my name, but I'm also finding ways of, again, how do I describe this, but also tapping into what's going on that we need to know as a business. So it's to your point, actually, Charlotte, there's a bit of a business case, but it's not direct. This is the temperament of a whole half of the population, and we get to be a voice by saying something that is not being spoken about publicly, but it is being spoken about in the circles. So you might become uncomfortable with it. I'm not. And sometimes I ask for forgiveness and never permission in that way, in a way. And also I would say is being creative about the language that you use. And I'm not just talking about this particular article. So you might have a very stance opinion on one thing or another. I'm just going to say tariffs because that feels right.
Relevant. Yeah.
But if you're talking about from a tariffs point of view, don't talk about tariffs and about how bad it is. Okay, but what I can do is I wonder what this does in terms of further foreign policy relations as it benefits the marginalized. It's the same way, if I may be so bold to say, every Thursday morning, well, today is I volunteer. I volunteer at a homeless shelter, and I do a breakfast shift. And if any person tries to schedule a meeting during that time, because my shift usually ends about 9:30 or like 10, depending how many people we're feeding that morning, I'll say, sure, I'll stop feeding the homeless and helping a nonprofit actually build a community because you want to talk about phones. And when I say that, it's, oh, okay, from you've said something that's hit my moral center, so I'm going to back off. So again, I didn't say no. I was thinking about the creative expression and language of how to say, I am putting boundaries in myself because my identity, as I was saying before, my identity is not locked to you. You are not my identity. This is not who I am. And then I leave IPG and come. Sabrina is always going to be Sabrina. You get a degree of Sabrina, and so do others get a degree of Sabrina. But I want to preserve my right to hold who I am for me.
So good. I mean, I would just want to like mic drop it on that. That is so good and so powerful. And I also love that you do that every Thursday. That is really inspiring. And I feel like something we can all consider putting into practice. There's a question that popped up, a couple in the chat. One around how do you measure the success of personal branding efforts? Charlotte, start with you.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think if you think about what do you want to get out of it, that is a good starting point. So when I'm thinking about personal branding, I'm not strictly tying it to KPIs about conversion and sales. The reason I'm doing it is to accelerate climate action and bring together a community. So that is my KPI and my why. So yeah, who have I connected with that's going to have a meaningful contribution on the bigger picture that we're working towards? Partnerships, great. New connections, great. Has it led to new business and other things? Yes, it has, but that's not my reason for being. And I think if I centered that as my reason for being, I would lose the kind of, I would be chasing the business reason rather than solving the bigger problem reason, which is why I do what I do. So yeah, I focus on community growth, engagement, and have we collectively moved the needle forward? So if I think on a very kind of practical level, I've used my channel, for example, to rally people to attend the climate strike. Awesome. I've used it for advocacy. I've used it to drive fundraising for nonprofits. All of that is measurable and truly beneficial.
Amazing. And I think, like Sabrina, you had mentioned earlier, if we're just looking at it from an ROI engagement perspective, then we're kind of missing the point. We can't just hope that it's going to get 500 likes and 60 shares and all the things, because it's really more about internally in yourself too, and having the joy of expressing yourself in this way, and sharing your voice. Anything else that you would want to add to that?
Yes, two things. The first thing is, like you're saying, is how do you know it's successful? I want to treat myself and give myself words of encouragement that I would give to my best friend. And I think we've all heard the expression before is, well, if you can say, how come you don't say that about yourself? You've said amazing things about me and you don't do it for yourself. So that's how I treat in terms of personal branding. And in addition to that, as I was saying, that I always try and keep an equilibrium between the capitalism, the commercial side, but also, again, the consciousness side. So, and I want to make sure that when I wake up, I said, I did the best that I could. The embetterment of me, but also to be embetterment of others. And that could be, I sit on the United Nations comms core, which looks at the sustainability and all the millennial goals and what's being achieved and how we can bring the private and public sector together. I also consult for a nonprofit, which fights for health equity and access to healthcare for marginalized communities. And that I do it so that I know that I'm making a difference. And if it comes back to me, that's a great bonus, because we're not looking for the validation of others. We have to look to ourselves to know that we've done enough within the capacity and the hands that we have.
That's right. That's right. Oh, thank you both so much for your time. If I kind of want to leave it with, I don't want to ask necessarily a question, but is there one thing that you would love to leave people with today, on a piece of advice, something to start, something to, if they're questioning maybe where to begin, Charlotte, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, there was one thing on reflecting that I was keen to voice today, and that's when I think about personal branding, I think too often it's seen as an act of vanity and selfishness, and I think that that's a barrier, and it can be paralyzing to acting on it. And I feel like that's a really big misunderstanding that needs to be addressed. It's not about vanity at all. It's about furthering the cause that you exist to kind of work towards. So I see it as one and the same of taking action. And I want to kind of remove that barrier. Don't think it's self-centering. It's not. And I think particularly for introverts, that concept of like speaking out can be a bit daunting. And again, if you decenter yourself, it's not actually about you. It's about furthering the cause that you exist to do. That's your why. That might help take away that barrier.
I love that. Mine is around Giving Tuesday allowed me to express a new stat that has not been released yet during the monthly Giving Summit I put together, which is right now, collectively in the United States, only 3% of giving is recurring. If we're able to move that from 3 to 5%, that's $9 billion annually in recurring revenue for nonprofits and philanthropy and the goodness that that can do. And so all of the things that I share in monthly giving are how can I help collectively move that 2% just to get us to an increased 9 billion annually and the goodness and the impact that can create. Sabrina, I'll leave the final word with you and then I'll wrap us up.
Okay, yeah, no pressure. Cool. Right, let's say then. All right. If history has proven and shown us again that our work is never in vain, and your work is never in vain. So whatever strides that you take in order to achieve it, I don't want to say take the doubt, because there will always be doubt, but know that it's for a better purpose and you're doing as much as you can. It's never not in vain.
That's right. So good. Thank you all so much for joining. We are right at the hour. Please remember to take the pledge. I don't know if we've already shared the link. I think we did, to the Impact Communication Institute's pledge for responsible and ethical communications. You will find all of these amazing upcoming events, Impact Councils, on your calendars. The next one coming up is April 3rd. It's the value of communications in a volatile world with Eleanor Hawkins, communications strategist and writer at Exodus. Please remember to register, attend. Remember, your stories are so, so, so powerful and can use it to drive change. So with that, thank you to you both and take care, everyone.